Sound of the front door opening echoed through the quiet house. Wine glanced up from the book in her hands, her body tensing slightly as Jungkook stepped inside. He didn't look at her as usual. His sharp features set in a neutral expression, his helmet dangling from one hand. Dinner's on the table, she said softly, not expecting a response. Jungkook, hmm, was all he offered as he set the helmet down and walked towards the dining room. Wine sighed, her gaze dropping back to the pages of her book. Not that she had been reading much anyway. She could hear him moving around the kitchen, the clink of plates, and the faint sound of water running. After a few minutes, the footsteps returned, and Jungkook appeared in the living room doorway, holding a steaming bowl of rice and soup. Jungkook, you haven't eaten, he said, his voice low but firm. She blinked up at him, caught off guard. I'm not hungry. He furrowed slightly. You didn't eat lunch either. How do you know that? She asked, surprised. I saw the untouched plate in the kitchen, he said simply. Wine's grip on the book tightened. She hadn't thought he paid attention to such things. I will eat later, she murmured, trying to turn her focus back to the book. Jungkook didn't move. Instead, he crossed the room and set the bowl down on the small table beside her. Eat now. Her head shot up, and for a moment she met his dark, unwavering gaze. There was no harshness in it, but no softness either. Just quiet insistence. Wine. You don't have to, Jungkook. You will make yourself sick. He interrupted, his voice dropping down just enough to make her breath hitch. Wine stared at him, the firmness in his tone making her heart flutter in a way she wasn't prepared for. He turned and walked towards the stairs, leaving her with the soup and a strange warmth blooming in her chest. She hesitated, then set her book down and picked up the spoon. The first sip was hot and comforting, and as she ate, she couldn't help glancing down towards the staircase. The next day, Wine was told that one of the Jungkook's family members will be invited for tea. As they have to talk about their family mafia business she had no interest in. She walked out of the kitchen with a tray of tea and snacks, her eyes landing on the scene in the living room. Jeon was seated beside Jungkook on the couch, too close. Wine glanced at Jeon's arm that was brushing his arm. Then she glanced at Jeon in anger, and when she noticed, Jeon smirked at Wine. Jungkook, oblivious as ever, was leaned back, his expression neutral. Jungkook, Wine called softly, walking over to place the tray on the table. She hesitated before moving to sit on the other side of him, but before she could, Jeon's voice came. Oh, Wine, don't you think you would be more comfortable somewhere else? Jungkook and I have some things to talk about. Family matters, you know. Wine froze, her hand hovering over the cushion. Her gaze darted to Jungkook, waiting for him to say something. But before he could, his mother started. Jeon's right. This isn't something you need to be a part of. Why don't you relax in your room? Wine clenched her jaw, looking at Jeon, who waved at Wine in mock offense. Without a word, she straightened and walked out of the room, her heart pounding with anger. Jungkook, she could stay here. It's not like she was going to leak our secrets. Jungkook's mom. You know we can, no matter who it is. Jungkook sighed angrily and rolled his eyes, sipping the hot tea while Jeon started talking. Once inside her room, she slammed the door shut and paced the floor. Her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't control. Jeon's smug expression, Jungkook's silence. After a while, the heavy thrum of the motorcycle's engine vibrated in Vine's chest as she stood at the window, watching Jungkook sit on the bike and handing Jeon the helmet, which she gladly took. She sat behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Vine gasped and quickly closed the blindfolds. She scoffed and sat on the bed, opening her book once again. Vine, why do I care? Jungkook immediately held Jeon's hand and threw it away. He stood up from his bike and put off his helmet. Jungkook, you know I'm married, right? Jeon, of course I know. I was just doing it for safety. Jungkook took a deep breath. Why don't you go home yourself? You've got drivers. Jeon, I also don't want to go with you. But what will you reply to your mother, who asked you to drop me home? The cover up was good by her. He couldn't refuse his mom. Not because he loves her, but because he will have to pay if he didn't listen to her. He sighed and said, let's go in the car. He said and moved towards the car without waiting for her approval. Her eyes darkened and jaw clenched, but she followed him anyway. And by the time he returned, Vine had decided if he didn't care, neither would she. She wouldn't waste another thought on the man who had made her feel invisible. The clatter of pots in the kitchen drew Jungkook's attention the moment he walked into the house. It was late, and though the lights were dimmed, the sound of wine moving around filled the quiet space. He frowned, kicking off his shoes. As he rounded the corner into the kitchen, he saw her, hair pulled back, a scowl edged into her features as she stirred something in a pot with more force than necessary. The faint scent of miso wafted through the air. Still awake? He asked, leaning casually against the door frame. She didn't turn. You're home late. He studied her tense shoulders and sighed. I had something to take care of. Right. Must have been important, she muttered, not looking at him. Jungkook pushed off the door frame and walked over to the counter. Without saying a word, he grabbed a glove and set it down beside her. Why, what are you doing? She asked, finally glancing at him. Helping. He reached for the ladle, but she swatted his hand away. Why, I don't need your help. Too bad. He gave her a small smirk, taking the ladle anyway and pouring the curry into the bowl. Jungkook, why do you look like you're about to kill someone? Her hand froze mid-ridge, and her eyes darted to his face. He wasn't smirking now. His gaze was steady, almost soft. Why? I don't want to talk about it. She mumbled, grabbing the spoon and setting it on the counter with unnecessary force. He didn't push. Instead, he set the bowl on the table, pulled out a chair, and gestured for her to sit. I'm not hungry, she said stubbornly. Yeah, you're funny, he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, she sat, staring down at the steaming bowl. Jungkook took the seat across from her, propping his chin on his hand as he watched her. Why are you staring now? She asked, finally looking at him. I'm wondering how long you're going to ignore me, he said simply. It was the first time they really talked for that long. He's just not habitual of this version of her. He kept glancing at her with determination, and when she looked back, she couldn't help but open up. Fine, fine. You want to know? I was upset because you left with her. Jungkook tilted his head, and and I don't understand why it bothered me so much. She admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. Jungkook. It was late at night, and my mother asked me to drop her home. You know I can't refuse her. She even sat behind me in the car. Wine. Car? You're lying on my face now. I saw you both sitting on the bike closely. She stopped. He blinked and then sighed. You saw me sitting with her on the bike, and not how I got up because she was getting too close. Wine blinked, her spoon hovering over the soup. What? Jungkook. You shouldn't have seen that. Or even if you did, you should have waited for my reaction at least. He rolled his eyes. Wine faltered. You. You're serious? Jungkook. You can ask the guards outside because you don't believe me. No, I didn't know. She muttered, suddenly feeling foolish. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Jungkook reached out, his fingers brushing hers as he nudged the spoon in her direction. Eat now. Whatever it is, we will talk about it after you're full, he said softly. Her heart skipped a beat at the unexpected gentleness in his voice. She stared at him, trying to differentiate the cold, distant man she had thought she had married with the one sitting in front of her now. Jungkook, you cooked this for yourself, right? She nodded slowly. Jungkook, good. Now eat. Vine took a bite slowly, and without looking at him, she said, I'm sorry, Jungkook. Unless you're full, we're not talking. She nodded and took another bite while a guard approached them. Guard, sir, your mother is calling you. Jungkook nodded and then looked at Vine. You eat, I will come back in a second. He stirred and walked toward the door, pausing just before stepping out. Jungkook. And Vine. She looked up, her chest tightening at the way he said her name. Jungkook. Don't ever think I would choose someone else over you. With that, he disappeared down the hallway, leaving her alone with her thoughts and a heart that wouldn't stop fluttering.